G'day guys, Socket here. Today we're going to continue on with our Room EQ Wizard car audio tuning tutorial series, and in this tutorial we're going to look at step 5, which is EQ. Now I'm going to do this tutorial in two parts. The first part is going to be talking about how to do EQ, so what is it, what are filters, all the theory behind EQ, and in the second part I'm going to take the measurements that we've been using in the last episode and show you how to do an EQ exercise in practice. So buckle up, this is going to be a big one. So let's get on with the tutorial, and let's start by talking about equalization, or EQ for short. What is it and why do we use it in car audio tuning? Well, EQ is basically the process of adjusting the different frequency levels in the sound spectrum to get a speaker to play a response that we want, or to level or tonally balance a tune so that we don't have the mids playing too loud versus the treble end of the spectrum, and everything sounds balanced and natural. So typically we would have a speaker measurement a bit like this, with its dips and bumps and all that type of stuff. We've put some crossovers in to manage the transition between this mid driver and a tweeter, or whatever. And so, but we want we don't want 200 to play a lot louder than 250, right? So what we would do is typically create a house curve, which provides a target line for us to equalize against, so that we can shape this speaker to play this response that we've got outlined in the house curve. So what we would do is we would use electrical filters to cut this this area here, and bring this one down, and etc., etc., to give the to force the speaker to play the response that we want, right? And we end up with something like that, and we'd go, okay, that's fantastic, right? We'll get rid of the house curve, and there we are. We've got the speaker playing, or shape the speaker to play the response that we want. So that's basically, in a very simple way, the EQ process. So let's go over to REW and see how we apply that in the REW tool. Okay, so we were just talking about the aim of EQ being to shape the response of the speaker and to make sure our tune is tonally balanced. But what do I mean by those two things? So let's look at the speaker response part first. So if you remember back to our last episode, we'd had some speaker measurements. So for example, this was the tweeter, and we'd put a crossover in and all of that type of stuff. And so the next step was to create a target line, or a house curve, for the tweeter that we wanted to EQ to. So in this case, we created a house curve with a Linkwitz-Riley 24 dB slope, with a crossover of 3300 hertz. And so we would go and do the EQ work to get the speaker to match, the speaker response to match the house curve that we desire. So we go and do that work, and we end up with something like the purple line. So we end up changing the speaker response from its raw form like this to its an EQ form in purple, right, where the speaker is now playing an acoustical response that's following the red target line. And we can go on and do that for for the mids, and we put in our target curve, and then we do the EQ work, and we go from this blue line to the purple, and once again it's following the target line fine, and we can continue that with our other speakers. So we sort of end up with the mid bass and the front sub and the rear sub, and if I turn on all the house curves, you can see that they all line up with them pretty well. And so that is what I mean by shaping the speaker response to get the speakers to play the frequency range and shape that we want them to. So what do I then mean by tonally balanced across the tune? Well, if you remember, we created an overarching house curve, this one in black, that was running from 20 Hertz to 20,000 Hertz. And so now that we have all the speakers EQ'd and they're following this house curve, it means that the bass end of the tune, which is playing louder than the rest of the frequencies, will be high enough that it doesn't sound washed out and bassless. And we have our high end and mid range playing at the same level, so they're nice and balanced. So we will end up, if we're following this target house curve, with a tonally balanced tune across the entire sound spectrum. So I guess when we finish the EQ work, this is the end result that we want. All of our speakers playing the responses that we want them to play, and our speakers all following a tonally balanced house curve. Great, so let's move on and have a look at the two common ways that people approach EQ. So I'm just going to use this front sub full range measure as a way of illustrating the two different approaches that people take to doing speaker EQ work. So in the tutorials that I've been making, I'm using a technique where we create house curves for each speaker, and then I'll line them with a overarching house curve for the tune, and then we fit the speaker response to match the house curve, right? And that is the way that I like to approach the EQing of my speakers. But the other technique that I've seen is where people take their full range measure and they create a house curve to kind of match the natural response of their speakers, and then they do their EQ work from there. So to give you an example, we'll go into the EQ tool, and so what they will do is sort of play around with the slope and the level within the tool to get a house curve that best follows the speaker itself. And so once they've got that, then they'll go and do their EQ work and repeat that process for each of their speakers. It's not that one method is better than the other, it's just that there are different approaches to car audio tuning, horses for courses and all that type of stuff. What is important though is that you keep the settings between your targets the same, so the same crossover, the same frequency. Otherwise you're going to have difficulty when it comes to your time alignment and summation. So the reason that I mentioned that, guys, is because some of you will have done this EQ work before, and you'd be saying, "Oh, Socket, that's not the way that I do the EQ work," and all that type of stuff. Absolutely, you can do it whatever way that works for you. We all end up getting to the same place in the end. So with that out of the way, I now want to have a talk about a very important concept, which is electrical versus acoustic response. So this is one of those concepts in car audio that people often find difficult to get their head around, but it's not as difficult as you might think. So acoustical response is the response of a speaker. And so that's what you get when you do a measurement. And so here on the screen is the acoustical response of the right mid bass with no electrical filters applied, right? So it's playing from 20 through to 10,000 Hertz. It's got peaks and dips and stuff going on everywhere. And if you played music through it, probably wouldn't sound that great, right? But that is the acoustical response of the speaker. And if you match that up with some other speakers in your system, like this, and none of them have got electrical filters on them, then they would all be playing noise. I'm not sure they'd be playing music, but it wouldn't probably sound that great. And that is not what we want in car audio. What we want is for each of our speakers to play the range of frequencies for which they're designed, and to play in sync with all the other speakers in your system. And we use electrical filters, or the electrical response, to shape the acoustical response of speakers, right? So starting with our right mid bass with no electrical filters applied. If we apply a crossover at 80 Hz and at 200 Hz, you'll see that the electrical crossovers have now changed the acoustical shape of the speaker response, right, or the acoustical response of the speaker. And if we make another change to the crossover and shift that to 100 and 175, then once again we get a different shape, right? So the electrical filters that we use shape the acoustical response of the speaker, and that's what's really important. We can keep adding electrical filters until we get the mid bass to play the range of frequencies that we want. Okay, so it's matching our house curve, and we do that by using electrical filters. And this is what's important: is it really doesn't matter what electrical filters that you use, as long as the acoustical response, you get the acoustical response that you're after. And when you put two acoustical responses together, that the slope, say if this is 24 dB and you have a 24 dB over here, that those slopes match. But if you've used a Butterworth slope to get it, or a bezel slope, or you've used parametric EQs to get that filter, honestly, it really doesn't matter. So what's important is the acoustical response, not the settings in your DSP. Those settings are only to get the shape that you're looking for. So this takes me to, I guess, the next question is, well, when I put in a crossover, how come the slope doesn't always match? And so, for example, here is our tweeter with a 3300 crossover, 24 dB Linkwitz-Riley slope, and then I go and create a electrical crossover with an electrical response like this, and you can see that they don't line up perfectly. If we zoom in a bit, you can see it deviates quite a bit. And the reason for that is while the electrical response is, electrical filter is influencing the shape or the acoustical response of the speaker, reflections and absorption and other stuff going on in the car will cause the speaker acoustical response to become distorted. So if we were doing this in a laboratory, with all the sound treatment and stuff, we probably wouldn't get this wobbly line. These things would kind of line up perfectly, but in a car environment, we're not that lucky. So I often think about the electrical filters almost like little jackhammers or chisels or something, chipping away at this rock, so that eventually, if I chip enough of it away, I carve out the response that I'm looking for, right? So that's a bit of an explanation of acoustical and electrical responses. Now what I want to do is just take you through some of those electrical filters that we have available to us to do this EQ work. So I thought we'd have a look at these electrical filter tools in the Helix DSP PC Tools software because it's a nice easy place to demonstrate them all. I will show you how to do it when we are doing the REW EQ tool stuff a little bit later in the tutorial, but this is a good one-stop shop, and we'll start with what we call the high pass and low pass filters. They're the first type of electrical filters that we've used, and you've already used them to do things like create house curves and to put your crossovers in, and that's probably the term that you're most familiar with. These are your speaker crossovers, and they're used to slope the shoulders and the slope of your speaker responses. And as you know, we can change the frequency, we can change the type of shape of the slope, so Butterworth and all these different crazy names, and we could also change the steepness of the slope, so a 12 dB or a 24 dB, or make it super steep, the 36 dB. But the Linkwitz-Riley 24 is the garden variety crossover or high pass low pass slope that is often used. So I'm not going to spend too much time on them. I think we're across those types of electrical filters. So the next most common electrical filter that we're going to have a look at is what we call the parametric EQ, or the peaking filter. It's often abbreviated PK, and this is the one that you use to cut the dips and boost the cut the peaks and boost the dips, that type of stuff that you do when you're doing EQ work. You can do all this type of stuff, right? And once again, most people are familiar with that stuff. Now, I guess the thing I want to show you is that in the DSP you can move these sliders up and down, but you can actually type in the values under here under parametric EQ, which gives you a super fine amount of control. So if you have a dip at 400 and let's say 37 hertz, and you want to add 4 dB to get rid of that dip, you can do it here in the parametric EQ settings. And so what we have is a 4 dB rise centered at 437 hertz. But you'll also notice that at 471 it's also been increased by 3.5 dB or whatever, and all the way down to 580 hertz and all the way out to 300 hertz. The frequency is changed somewhat by this electrical PK filter. And so the width of how many frequency bands are affected is dictated by what we call the Q factor. And so the lower the number, the broader the impact. So if I change this to 1, you can see that it's still a 4 dB rise around 437 hertz, but all of these frequencies are affected. So if you want to make a sweeping broad change to, for example, the slope of a speaker response or something like that, you might use a very shallow PK filter. Alternatively, if you've got a very narrow dip or narrow peak, you might want to apply a very high numbered Q, such as 15, and that will give you a surgical, very sharp PK filter, and will only affect a very narrow band of frequencies around the one that you're targeting. So I think the default is 4.3. That's the sort of average setting for a PK filter. And if you want to make a cut instead of a dip, then you simply -4, for example, which will cut a boost, a peak in your speaker response. So that's those PK filters that we're all pretty familiar with. So the other kind of filters which I'll talk about, but you probably won't use as much because they're pretty special. And so the first one is called a low shelf filter. So if I click down here and click on the low shelf filter and I move this around, what this does is cut or boost the low end of the frequency. So this can be handy when your subwoofer is rolling off towards the end of the spectrum, and you want to sort of keep it from rolling off so much. You might put a low shelf filter in and and do that, right? And then the other type opposite is a high shelf filter, something like this, and it's the same type of thing. Your tweeters might be rolling off, so you want to counteract that by putting in a high shelf filter to keep them sort of playing further into the spectrum, right? But they're special cases, high shelves and low shelf filters. And then the final filter that I'll just talk about is the all-pass filter. So I'm going to put an all-pass filter in at 630 hertz, and let's see what happens. And the answer is nothing. Well, nothing you can see, because an all-pass filter doesn't affect the speaker response or the magnitude of the speaker response. It affects the phase. So if I change that from 630 to, 200, you'll see the phase will move, and you'll get a phase change centered around that 200 hertz. So this type of electrical filter is used for when we're doing corrections to phase in our time alignment work. So we'll talk about that a lot more when we come to time alignment. So now we've had a bit of an introduction to the electrical filter tools. Let's go back into REW and look at the EQ tool. Okay, so let's go have a look at the REW EQ tool, and I'm going to use the right mid-bass measure as a demo of how to EQ a speaker. So here we have the right mid-bass in full range. We're going to go up into the EQ tool. As always, we've got the lower pane closed off, and we've got our pull down menu here. And so let me run through the pull down menus very quickly. So the first one is the what type of DSP you're using. Now you have a bunch of them here. Audio Tech Fisher is included, Audison, some of the common ones. A lot of stuff that we don't use because, once again, home audio. But I tend to leave this set to generic because it gives you the full suite of tools available within REW. If you pick one of the manufacturers, then REW locks you out of a bunch of tools because it won't work with your DSP. But I will show you how. If, for example, your DSP's only got 12 EQ channels, I'll show you how to get 12 EQ channels using the REW tool. So fear not. So I tend to leave that at generic. We then have the next pull down, which is target settings. We've already looked at this when we were creating house curves, but let's just, we want a house curve because we're going to EQ this full range speaker, so we want the crossovers in this case set to 100 and 175. Linkwitz Riley 24 dB slopes, all of this low frequency rise and high frequency fall settings, as we had before when we were setting up our house curves. And I have a target level of 55 because the the low frequency rise is adding 5 onto my target level, which is usually 50. So once I've done that, I can click Generate Measure from Target Shape, and that will put a copy of the house curve down here in the screen, and so we can call that mid-bass house curve, 2 or whatever. Okay, so back into the EQ screen. The only thing that we haven't really looked at is this calculate level from target level from response. So how I was saying that I've set my target level for 55? Well, you can allow REW to automatically calculate the target level from the speaker response if you want to, and it will automatically set the target level in this window. I tend to just do it manually, but that auto target level calculation option is available if you want to use it. The next pull down we're going to have a look at is the filter tasks. So that is the window that we use basically to do all the auto EQ work. So I'll just run through this really quickly. You've got match range, which sets the range for which you want to do the EQ. If we're going to do the EQ on this full range measure, we're probably going to want to run the range from something like 30 through to 400 or 500 or something. We won't want to EQ all this stuff out here, so you would put in 30 to maybe 450, something like that, and you'll notice that the part that is within the range of the auto EQ will stay clear, and the rest of it will be kind of grayed out. So if you bump into this problem, I think I've talked about this before, but it's probably because this match range is not set correctly. So just simply go back in and change it from 20 to 20,000, and your whole screen should clear up again. The other settings that we have here quickly is individual max boost. So this tells REW what is the maximum amount of boost that you want to apply to a dip. Overall max boost, I'm not really sure what the difference between those two are. I just basically leave it set at 6 as well. Flatness target is how accurate you want to be around your target line. So you can change that to, for example, I want to be within plus or minus 2 dB of the target line, or 1 dB of the target line. So the more accurate you are, the more filters that REW will try to use. Low shelf, high shelf, never really used them. They're really only useful for doing EQ work on the sub or the tweeter. We had a quick look at them when we were looking at the electronic filter tools. I tend to just do it manually if I need them, so I tend to leave those turned off. Narrow filters below 200 and VaryQ above 200. These are a little bit technical. I won't go into them now. I'll do a viewer question if anybody's interested in the detail, but let's just say leave those both ticked. Alright, the next button is Match Response to Target, which is the button that you press when you want to REW to run auto EQ. It should really be a big green go button, honestly, but that's the way it is. These next settings, manual optimization control, I rarely use them, so I'm not going to spend any time talking about those. The next grouping down here is to do with filters. So once you've created some filters after you've done your auto EQ, you can save them, export them, or reset them back to default with these buttons down here. And then just like the generate measure from target shape to create a house curve, you can also generate a measure from the predicted plot or from the filters. I don't know what this last one is, so I'm not going to comment. And then of course we have modal analysis and resonances, which are really to do with home audio stuff, so don't really apply to us. So just for completion, I'll run through the other controls on the screen. You've got the camera icon to take a screenshot. You have you have to turn on and off the scroll bars. You're able to change from logarithmic to linear plotting. You've got your graph limits, so being able to sort of set your viewing window, same as on the other screens. And then you have this wheel icon, which I basically just used if I need to do some smoothing or something like that, right? So that's often handy. And finally, there's the EQ toolbar, which I think I'll come back to and show you guys a little bit later when we've got some data in there. So that sort of takes us on a quick cook's tour of the EQ tool. As I said before, the target settings are largely for doing your house curves, and the filter tasks are for doing your auto EQ work. So next we'll move on to just doing a quick EQ exercise using this mid-bass. Okay, I've got the right mid-bass measures up on the screen, so red in full range and purple with the crossovers in them. And the first thing I just want to talk about is the resolution. So I know that when you're taking your measures, you're probably taking them in 1/48th resolution because you want the most amount of detail that you can when you're taking measures. But the problem is if you try to EQ measurements taken in this high resolution, you will quickly run out of EQ bands. And the reason for that is, you might have 20 or 30 EQ bands depending on your DSP, and when you try to auto EQ this, REW is going to try to cut that, that peak there and boost that dip and blah 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 blah, and quickly you'll exhaust all of your EQ bands, and you probably won't get to complete the work properly. So to avoid that, the best thing to do is to find a happy medium, and so 1/3 or 1/6 octave smoothing is ideal. So hint number one is turn down your resolutions before you start your EQ. Right, rule number two is you always need a target curve or something to EQ against. So in our case, we're setting up house curves, and we're trying to get the speaker to match our house curve or our target line. The problem is though, you need to make sure that your speaker response is outside the target curve line. Otherwise, you can't really do the EQ work, because the way the auto EQ system works is that it will cut the response back to match the target line. It will very rarely sort of boost all this area out. So certainly rule number 2 is have a target line, but you need to make sure that your speaker response is on the right side of the target line before you start your auto EQ work. Right, the third rule of thumb is you don't need to EQ everything completely to this target line all the way down to the absolute infinity. The rule of thumb is basically, match the slopes as much as possible down 30 dB, and only if you've got spare EQ bands and you really a bit OCD about stuff, then certainly do a bit more smoothing, but it's not necessarily to that has to be absolutely perfect all the way up and down these slopes. And the reason for that is in the first 10 dB, so this is starting at a peak of 53, so if we go down 10 dB to 43, something like that, yes, absolutely, this is the most important region to get right, because that has the biggest impact on the summation and the speaker response between the two speakers. If we come down another 10 dB to 33, now we're 20 dB down from the peak. Once again, this is important to get right, but not critical. And if you come down another 10 dB down to 23, and we're now 30 dB down, it's good to have this right, but if you're out of EQ filters, then so be it. It's not the end of the world. But beyond that, it's diminishing returns. So the problem is a lot of people feel like they have to get this absolutely straight all the way down, and of course they'll use 2 or 3 or 4 EQ filters, just on this part, when the impact is pretty minimal. Right, the next rule of thumb, or I guess not necessarily a rule of thumb, but a tip, is boosting is not the devil. Okay, so I don't know. A lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't boost, that's terrible, only cut. No, that's not right. Boosting is fine. I think where it comes from is if you boost too much, you can overdrive a speaker. But when we go into the EQ tab, we have this individual max boost setting. So if you set it to 6, 99% of the time you're going to be just fine. What you don't want to do is stack boosts. So put a boost in at 88 and then put a second boost in at 88, so that you get 8 or 12 or whatever it is dB boosting, right? If you've got a very narrow dip in your response, it's likely to be caused by a cancellation, where one wave is cancelling out the other, and it doesn't matter how much energy you put into that area. All you do is have more energy pushing against more energy, right? And it still ends up not going anywhere. It still ends up being a cancellation. So very narrow dips are generally unresponsive. But if you put a filter in them and they don't respond, then you can be sure they're a cancellation. But boosts are not the devil. Okay, so the last one I just want to mention, it's not really a rule of thumb, it's probably something just to make people aware of about how REW works. But and I might have mentioned this before, but basically you need to select the speaker that you want to do the EQ work on. So for example, if I want to work on the right mid bass, it will come up white and everything else will be grayed out, and then I can click on EQ and start doing my work. Not quite often, but occasionally what will happen is I'll forget to select the right speaker, and I'll be working over here and going, geez, that looks odd, what the hell's going on? Only to realise that, hang on, I'm supposed to be working on the right mid bass, right? So I guess just pointing out to people who may not be aware that the EQ tool works with the speaker that you've got selected, and when you select it, it is the speaker the measurement that you have selected here will appear as the measurement in the display window. Alright, so enough about rules and rules of thumb. I hope you find them helpful, but now we're going to get on to doing some EQ work. Now, the whole aim of EQ is, as we've already covered, is to use electrical filters to shape the response of your speaker and to match whatever target curve that you are trying to match. Now, often you will run into the problem of the response being on the inside of your target line, just like they are here. And so I want to just show you some different ways of how you can deal with that, because before you can run your auto EQ, the response needs to be on the outside. Now, I think one of the ways that you could do it is to change the target curve and, narrow this target curve up so that it's running on the inside of the speaker response. But the problem with that is it's going to throw out all of your target curves and the relationship between them. So we don't really want to do that. We want to match the speaker to the target curve and not the other way around. But if you are going to do that, then you'll basically have to redo all of your house curve setting again, and that's fine. Just start over. But there are other ways to manipulate the frequency response and get it to fall on the right side of the target line. And the first way to just double check that your speaker is capable of playing the range of your target curve is to open up your full range measure. So I'm just going to shut down the other measure for a moment. So here's the full range measure. So this is the speaker just playing naturally, and you can see that it's playing from 10 hertz, 20 hertz, or something all the way over to here. So there is plenty of scope, and it will absolutely, if you shape it with some electrical filters, play outside of this target curve. Now, if for some reason your speaker was sort of falling off over here and it wasn't reaching the target curve, well, that's a completely different matter. But that is one way to check, by just looking at your full range measure. So let's bring up the measurement that we're trying to fix. All right, so there are basically three different ways of dealing with this problem. One way is to increase the gain on the speaker, so actually sort of move it up in that direction. Another way is to change the slope of the crossovers. So for example, excuse me, we've got a 24 dB slope. Maybe if we change that to a 12, it will make the slope move to the outside of the target curve. Another way to do it is to change the crossovers. So go from a Linkwitz-Riley crossover to a bezel and see if that falls outside the slope. You can change your crossover settings. So I think these are set at 100 and 175. Maybe if you move the crossover to 90 and 190 or something like that, the crossovers, the response will be outside the curve. You could try using a PK filter, a very broad PK filter, to push the response outside the curve. So there's lots of ways to sort of fix it. So let's go and just look at each of those in turn, starting with increasing the volume. Right, so normally every time you would do this, we would pop into the DSP and you would, for example, change the frequency on your crossover, and then you would go and measure it with your microphone, and you would put that back into put the measure back into REW. And or if you're going to change the type of slope, you would change it to a Butterworth, on Butterworth on both, and then you would go and remeasure the speaker, and then you put the measure back into REW. Now, because I am not connected to the car and all that type of stuff, I'm going to simulate these things in REW just to show you how it would be done. But just remember, EQ work is about putting some new settings into the DSP, measuring your speaker, loading that measurement back into REW, making another adjustment in the DSP, taking another measure of the speaker, and until you've got your speaker EQ to the way you like. So if we were going to do this, I'm going to just simulate increasing the volume to show you how you might sort of get out of this problem. So I'm going to open up actions and measurement actions, and I want measurement 8, That's the one I'm going to work with. And you can see that if I start adding gain to the speakers, you can see what's happening to the speaker response. It's starting to shift up and it's starting to move outside the target lines. Now, to completely clear the target lines, I need to go up a little bit more. I probably need to get up to, you know, like 11 dB, right? And that's a lot of speaker to sort of cut out, right? But increasing volume is a viable option. Now, do I have 11 dB available on my right mid bass? No, because I know that the maximum gain is 5 in the Helix DSP. I can go into the DSP and have a quick look. Actually, I've got the right mid bass at -10 gain, so I could add on, you know, 11 if I wanted to and take it to +1, and then I would go and measure the speaker and put the measurement into REW, right? But that's a lot of level. So often you will increase the level to a, you know, maybe not that much. Maybe I would, you know, increase it by, you know, maybe 3, and use other techniques to, you know, fix up some of these other problem areas, right? So often solving this EQ puzzle is using more than one method, but certainly one method is changing the volume. Okay, so let's reset that back to 0 and go back to where we started. So the second method that I mentioned is to change the crossover slopes, I think I said. We're not sure. Anyway, so let's try that. So we're going to do that using the full range measure. I'm going to go into the EQ, and here in predicted is the measure that we've got on the other screen. Okay, and I'll just bring this down so we can see it a little bit. I said that we have our crossovers, our high pass and our low pass crossover filters set as Linkwitz-Riley, 12 dB. And so if I turn that to 12 dBs instead, and I generate measurement from predicted, and we can now go and look at what we have. Oops, and I did exactly what I said not to, which is EQ in 48 octave. So I better turn that off and turn that back to 1.6. Sorry about that. Murphy's Law. Okay, so let's just take out the purple measure and see what's happened. So by going from 24 dB octave to 12 dB octave, you can see that now, you know, now the response is outside of the black target curves, and now I might be able to use my volume to, oops, not that measurement at all. I want number 9. You can use the volume to sort of lift it up, you know, maybe 4 dB, and, you know, the whole response is now outside of the target curve, right? And you should be able to EQ that, no problems at all. All right, so that is the that's what happens when you change your target slopes. That is another tool that you can use to fix this problem. All right, let's move on to the next option, which is changing the type of slope that you're using. So we'll go into the EQ again. We'll change this back to 24, and we will, instead of using Linkwitz-Riley, we will use, let's try a bezel. Okay, so let's just see what happens, and even without going onto the other screen, you can see that the curve is going outside, so we're generating measure from predicted. And let's just turn the purple one off, and so here we have, instead of a Linkwitz-Riley slope, we're using a bezel slope, and once again that's kind of solved our problem for us, right? Fantastic. All right, so that's 3 different options. So we'll get rid of that now and have a look at the 4th option, which is basically changing your crossover slopes, right? So let's put them back to Riley. Okay, so this time instead of having them, actually what I'm going to do is just try to move that like that. Sorry, just it seems to be in the way of this window. That's better. Okay, so now instead of using 100, a crossover at 100 and a crossover at 175, I'm going to change that to, let's say, 90. Right, and this one to 185, right? And as I do that, you see the slopes are starting to move to the outside, but 90 is not enough, so I might try 80, and I might try 190, right? Okay, now they're almost there, and maybe 195. Whoops, 195. Oh dear. Okay, that's better. And maybe 80 is okay. Like we're down here close to the 30 dB mark. Maybe 80 is fine, but let's cut it back to 75 just to make sure, right? Okay, so now, with the exception of this little tiny piece here, everything is on the outside of the target curve. So that is another method for fixing up your curves. So we'll just generate a measurement from predicted, and we will go and have a quick look at that. So just turning that off, and as you can see, it's outside the curve now, which is fabulous. So the last method that I will show you for fixing up this problem is to use a PK filter, or parametric EQ filter. So we're just going to switch these back to the original settings, which was 100 and 175, right? So the way that this is done is to apply a broad parametric EQ filter, somewhere down here in the depths of the slope. So just change this to full range. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to need a couple of PK filters, and so let's just use number 19. That's fine. So we have PK, and we're going to apply a filter, I don't know, somewhere around here, which would be 40 hertz, right? So 40 hertz, apply a filter, a boost of 6, and a Q of 1, right? And see, what you can see is that if I turn that off and on, you can see that that PK filter has sort of pushed all of this out to the left. And if I want to sort of push that out as well, I can, once again put a filter in at, I don't know, 27.5. So PK 27.5. Give it another 6 dB boost, and another one of 1, right? And there we go. We've got all of that side of the speaker response outside the target curve now, and we can, if we need to, do the same on the other side. So we'll throw a PK filter in at 281, right? 281, and a 6, and a 1, right? Boom. And finally, maybe one down here at 517, right? Something like that. Doesn't really matter. 517, 6, and 1. And there we go. We've got the shape moved to where we want to, right? So they are different ways of solving or moving the response out to outside the target curve. Often it's not about using one technique or another. It's about just using whatever combination of EQ filters that you need to get the desired response that you're trying to achieve. And as I said earlier in the tutorial, it doesn't really matter what electrical filters that you use. What is important is the acoustical response that you achieve, right? So now I'm going to move on to actually doing the EQ of this speaker. Okay, so to get started, I would bring up my measure with the crossovers sort of set into it, and I'd look at that and go, yeah, that's not exactly what I want. I need to do some work to sort of push this out and push that out. And so I would go back into the full range measure and I would do some EQ work. And so I think the easiest way to do this would be for me to put in a high pass at 80 Hertz and use a Linkwitz Riley 24, and to put in a low pass at 200 Hertz, Linkwitz Riley 24, and that should get me out of the problem area. So they're both on the outside. A little bit going on here. Maybe what I'll do is add a PK filter down the bottom here at maybe 30 Hertz. So 30 Hertz, not too big, maybe a 3, and I'll add on one of those. So got a little bit of distance there, and I might even do the same on this side, just to stretch it out a little bit. Okay, so I'll make that, that's 451, and add a 3 dB and a 1. Right, so that's given me some more wriggle room. So I'm going to want to keep these PK filter recordings. So the first thing I want to do is basically turn these auto EQs off and save this these filter settings so I can add to them later. So I've used up 2 of my 20 PK filter slots so far. So to save it, you hit Control-Alt-S, and then you can save it, and I think I've got one here called Demo 1. That'll be fine. Overwrite that. There is a little save button up here, but I find in this version of REW it doesn't work. So if I click on it, it doesn't save the file in the format that we need. So Control-Alt-S is the way that you bring up the save window. Alright, so now that I've got my filter saved, I'll just close that down for a second, and we will go and set the range for the auto EQ. But before I do that, I'm just going to generate a measure from predicted so I can keep track of what's going on. So that's now down the bottom. So this will be mid bass with, I think it was 80, and hang on, what was it? What settings did we set? 80 and 200. Okay. 80 and 200 crossover, some PK filters added, right? So that's my first measure. And as always, REW gives it a crazy brown color, right? So, okay, so that's outside my target curve, looking good. So now I'll go back into EQ and I'll set my range, because I don't want to EQ way over here. I want to EQ between maybe 20 or 30 through to 400 or 500. So let's chuck in 20 to 400 and 6 maximum boost, flatness target of 1, all of that stuff. I think we're ready to go. So we'll hit match response to target, ignore this pop-up. You always get messages like that, so you just ignore them. And here we go. It has given us a pretty good match straight up, and we have used what looks like to be 12 filters or something like that. Let's just open this up a bit and have a look. Yeah, so we've used 14 filters. Great, including the 2 that I saved. I think, yep, there's the 2 that I saved before, 6 and 7. They it puts all the filters in order. Okay, so now that that's done, I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 filters, 6 filters left. Now, one question that people always argue about, should I use more filters or less? Look, it's personal preference. I know a lot of people like to use 3 or 4 filters and they get a lot of detail. There's a lot of people who try to EQ the hell out of their responses. I personally find the fewer filters the better, but horses for courses, as I always say. So that is the first round of EQing, and so I would go and generate measure from predicted. Once again, go down here and have a look, and sure enough, it's made that. Let's turn that green so we can kind of see it, and get rid of the full range measure. So here's the first curve that we did, where we made some adjustments to the crossovers and things. So I'll just turn that off, and here is the second pass EQ filter in green, and it's a pretty good match. There's one or two dips here that I might be able to get rid of. Maybe that, but that's down at 20, so it's well below the 30 cutoff. But let's see if we can just tidy up these two or three little dips. So we'll go back into EQ. We'll open that up. Now we'll open up the EQ filter. Pick some spare filters, and let's see, we probably just want to raise the target level a little bit, like that, just so we can see these problem areas a little bit. So we're just moving the house curve, right? We're not doing anything else. And let's throw a PK filter in at 89, something like that. So 89. Let's give it a 3 and a pretty narrow Q of, let's say, 12, right? Something like that. And that's probably a little bit too much, so let's say 2.5. Yep, okay. Well, hasn't worked out exactly as I would like. Maybe we need to reduce the Q a bit, make it a 10, and bring this down. So it's about just sort of fiddling around, and once you've got your settings right, then put them into the DSP and do your measure. But that looks okay to me. So I'll go to the next one, which is at 155, 155, and maybe a 1 dB increase, and leave it at maybe a 9, something like that. And then this little one here might be a bit tricky, but let's push it from here, and let's make that's 260. Let's give that a 3 dB increase and a really sharp Q, so 15, or something like that. Okay, bang. So let's generate measurement from predicted, and let's go have a little look. And sure enough, REW, why do you mock me? Okay, so there we go. It's looking pretty good, right? I'd be pretty happy with that. And so that would be my measure. Now it doesn't end there, because now that I'm happy with the EQ work, I would need to load my settings into the DSP. So because we haven't gone over the 20, I've still got a couple of EQ bands left spare. So what I like to always do is just save it, so I've got it in case something goes wrong. I've got it saved under demo 1, so that's fine. And now what we're going to do is go into the DSP, the speaker that we're working on, which in this case is the right mid bass. Go back into REW, into REW, thank you, and into the EQ tool. Oh gosh, what's going on here? Into the EQ tool and into your EQ filter window, and then click on this double white page, which is called the Copy the Filter Settings to Clipboard as Text button. Right, so we'll do that, and then when you go back into the DSP, this window will pop up, which is basically asking you, do you want to import these settings, because it will overwrite anything that you have here. And of course we do. We've done this on purpose. So we will click OK, and there we have it. The settings have been now transferred into your Helix DSP or whatever, and you would take your microphone, you would go and measure that, and you would check to see how the measurement stacks up against your house curve, right? And so that is how you would EQ your speakers, and you do that one by one. and then once you've got them all done, you would compare them to your house curve, and if necessarily just tweak the level a little bit to maybe bring it back into alignment. So I think it's the last one here, so it might need to drop half a dB just to get it back in alignment with the house curve. So once again, you go into the DSP, make the change, make the measure, etc., etc., and you do that with all your speakers to level match them. So before we move on to time alignment, you want to make sure that all your EQ work and all of your level matching work has been done, because once that's all set, we'll move on to time alignment, and in time alignment we adjust all of the delays and all of the phase, so all the speakers are playing together. If you go back and change the levels, or if you go back and change the EQ settings or anything like that after you do time alignment, you've got to do the time alignment all over again, because you will muck up the timing and phase relationships between your speakers. So get all your EQ work and all your level stuff out of the way. Once that's done, lock it in stone, then move on to your time alignment. So guys, that brings us to the end of part 1 of this tutorial. It was a monster episode, so if you watched all the way through to the end, thanks for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. I hope that you got a lot out of this tutorial. Once again, if you've got any questions, pop them down in the comments. Otherwise, I'll join you for the next episode, where we're going to do a full EQ run through all of the speakers, so you can see how it's done in real life. Okay, catch you in the next episode.